Rev asked me about a month ago what I felt the most important story of the past decade was. And you assumed that I would say
the election of Donald Trump.
And I said,
nope, that was number two.
That was number two. I felt that the opioid epidemic in America was the most important issue this country was struggling with. It is a matter of the heart, the mind, the soul, the intuition. It knows no political bounds. It knows no socioeconomic bounds. It is defining a generation in a way that I think is unfortunate, unfair. You watch Live PD, and this is, I think about you a lot when I'm watching Live PD, and the number of people who are arrested for having prescription medication, not prescribed, painkillers, OxyContin, hydrocodone, all these other things that are very necessary in our society. And I just don't think that I can have the experiences that I have and what I have dealt with for the past 3 or 4 years and not be publicly involved in some way, shape, or form in helping others navigate and negotiate those very difficult waters. You've heard me many times talk about my son. My son has a medical condition. My son has a leg 3.5 inches shorter than his other leg. Through 17 surgeries, we have extended the leg. We've gone from Charleston to Greenville to Florence to New York City. World-famous hospitals and doctors have basically lengthened my son's leg by 3.5 inches. That is a medical miracle of which we have benefited from as a family, and he has individually. The other side of that is during the process, he was prescribed opiates. Necessary. I mean, he's going through a lot of trauma. His body is being influenced by doctors gouging and pulling and twisting and breaking, and it creates a lot of pain. And about 5 years ago, my wife and I began to notice a decline in self-esteem. We began to notice that my son never had any money, and he was always in dire straits. He was a shadow of his former self, and he's 29 years old now, and he's in the studio with us this morning. So I'll introduce my son, Jesse. Jesse, good morning.
Morning.
How are you?
Pretty good.
I hope this isn't your first stop. I hope your first stop was work.
Yeah.
This is your, come closer to the mic there. This is your second stop. But anyway, we have struggled together through this. And I just feel like there's some necessariness, if that's a word, that I've got these experiences that have basically helped shape the way I understand opiates and addiction, and I've lived that through my son. But I want to. We got about 3 minutes here, and then we'll come back, and Brian Braddock's going to join us, and some other people are going to join us. But I want you to tell a little bit of your story. You were in church with me yesterday, and we spoke to our congregation. I want you, if you don't mind, I mean, from beginning to today, the effect and impact opiates has had on your life and us as a family.
Well, I was born with one leg shorter, and that I had my first surgery was at 12 years old. My most recent one was this past September. So for the more than half my life, I've had surgery. So every 1.5, 2 years, I would get pain pills legally. And probably by the time I was 21 or 22, it had pretty much, I was an addict. It had pretty much taken over my life. I never had any money. Did a lot of stupid things to get money, to get pain pills. And, one day I just realized I had completely lost control. I had nothing. And that's when I told you and Mom about it.
I was in the parking lot at West Florence picking up my daughter from practice, and something had happened in our family, and we'll tell the details, but these details aren't necessary. And I could hear the brokenness in his voice when he said, I can't stop taking pain pills. I don't know what to do. I can't not take them, and I don't have a life. You told me something one day that you lived your life in
$35 at a time. One pain pill costs $35. So if I could figure out a way to get $35 every day, it was a good day. If I could figure out how to get 70 one day, it was a great day. because I would every dime I had would go to it. If I had $40, I would get a pain pill and put $5 in gas, or go to the dollar menu at McDonald's. But that came second. Food came second to pain pills.
And you've expressed to me, because I have, as aggravating as I am about wanting to know everything about everything, I am equally as obsessed about this. When we decided as a family, and I'll share this with you. I don't like talking about this. This is as nasty as I've ever felt in my life. It culminated with he and I in a fight like two drunks in a bar in the den of his home. Folks, the realization I had to come to and the conclusion I had to draw is that my son was not no count. He was not a derelict. He was not a chump. He was not someone who wouldn't pull his own weight. He was sick. And I'd always believed that addiction, mental illness, depression, these things that have been stigmatized in American culture and society were something you could help yourself about. You got to pick yourself up by the bootstraps, was my response. Through talking with people who have studied the human brain, Jesse ended up going to a recovery center that was run by a neurosurgeon of Emory University. And when he basically chastised me for the way I was trying to deal with my son, he said, your son's sick. Your son would rather do nothing but stop taking these pills, but he can't. They reprogram the brain. They create a different pleasure sensation. It's so manipulative in what these medications do. But we ended up in the floor, and just one of the nastiest scenes you could ever imagine, a father and son. And since then, I'll let you tell. We've got about 30 seconds or a minute here, and then we'll come back because I want to share a lot. And we got Brian Braddock. We've got some other people coming in just a bit that'll share these stories. I want to be a part. Just hold on. I'm not going to cut you off, but I want to be a part of raising awareness and creating some sense of where we go from here in regards to what I think is inflicting so much damage to our community and communities all around the country, and that is the opioid epidemic. Back in a minute.
And now back to more of Wake Up Carolina.
Takes Mondays to make Fridays. 843-661-0937 is our number. We've assembled an all-star panel. We're talking about it. We're normally talking about crazy Bernie or how much Biden's win in South Carolina will change the face of the the Democrat primary. We're not going to do that for the next hour. Rev asked me a couple of months ago what I thought was the single most important and defining issue of the last decade. He assumed mistakenly that I would say the Trump election. And that was of consequence, no doubt about it. When America votes for somebody as unorthodox and uncommon as Donald Trump, it would stand to reason that most people who do what we do would say that. But I had lived something that most of you didn't know I was living. I talked a little bit about it on the air because I think it's, Rev, if you jump in here, because you remember the day I came in, I said, Rev, you're not going to believe what I read in the Fed Beige book. Mm-hmm. And you said, well, you're a weirdo anyway to read the Fed
First of all,
Beige
that you
book.
read the book, that you know what the Beige book is.
But in the Beige book, the New York City Federal Reserve, or the New York State Federal Reserve, said that they believed worker productivity had declined by 0.2% because of the opioid epidemic.
Now think about that. Worker productivity had declined for the entire country because of this issue.
Because so many people were addicted to opiates. And I had been living this. I'd been living it in the first person with my oldest son, who shared a little bit of his story with you before the break. Jesse was born with a leg 3.5 inches shorter than his other leg. We had gone through a myriad of surgeries and procedures. During the process, he had become addicted to opiates. Jesse, jump in here because you got to get close to the mic here. But you said you knew the first time you took some of the medication that you liked it.
I was 12 years old, and I think they had liquid pain medicine back then, the codeine, hydrocodone stuff or whatever. And right off the bat, I knew I liked it. I was 12 years old.
You were convinced, and once again, I've told some of the history of what you and I dealt with, but you told me that you just don't believe. Let me back up half step. I want to tell you who's in the room. Adam Richardson is our pastor. He's in the room. Reeves Cannon is an associate pastor at Sandhurst. They're in the room for a reason. I'll elaborate on that in just a second. Brian Braddock is here. Brian is only getting the official title, House of the Hope of the PD.
Correct. Yes,
Because you have to explain what the PD is a lot of times, but not in this room. You won't
Not
have to
in this
explain
room.
that. And then we've got a lawmaker, because we're going to lobby here in just a second. As much as I don't like lobbying, we're going to lobby here in just a second. Jay Jordan is a member of the House of Representatives and understands, and I think this is why I've approached Jay a lot about this, and Jay knows some of my story. A lot of my story is because I think the church has a unique responsibility in helping the community and the country address this. So we're going to have somewhat of a kind of a round table here in just a bit. Brian, I want to start with you, if you don't mind. You and I have shared a lot of conversations through the years about politics and your mission and your the struggles that you deal with. But you not only have a professional story, you've got a personal story.
Yes, sir. So I would say I've had victory over my addiction through a relationship with Jesus Christ for 14 years. And at my lowest point, I'd been addicted to opioids and cocaine for about 5 or 6 years. And at my lowest point, I found myself on my hands and knees looking for crack cocaine out of the floor mat of my vehicle. And that was it. You know, that at that point, I found myself in a position of prayer. I was kneeling. I was going through it, and, you know, and just trying to find some little piece, you know, crack cocaine for one more high. And I said a simple prayer. I said, Lord, I can't do it anymore. And that was my bottom.
And now you're in the business of helping people who deal with addictions and struggles. What part of your business is associated with people who are dealing with addiction?
So I would say at least, you know, 30-40% of the people that we work with have some form of active addiction. You know, and you know, what's the cart and what's the horse? Did they get addicted and become homeless, or through homelessness did they become addicted? But at some point, you know, it's affected everyone that we've dealt with.
And here's the decision, and this is why Jesse's story is so important to me. I know there are many people out there who share a similarity with me in that you believe it's a choice. I mean, you believe that somebody has made a willing decision to take a pill that they know at the end of the day is not going to lead to a good outcome. That's where I was. That's exactly where I was. And I believe that I could take my son's phone. I could threaten my son with some sort of punishment. I could tell him he's going to lose his home. I could tell him he's going to lose his car. He can't use the gas card. And through all those threatening imposition, I mean, I could convince him this is not the way to go until I talked to a neurosurgeon at Emory University who had studied the brain and expressed to me in a very academic way why my son was helpless, why my son had no choice but to take those pills. I want to go back, and then I'm going to let Adam jump in here, our pastor at Sandhurst, who's allowed me to abuse my privilege as being a member of, but I'll do that in a hurry. I mean, he'll find out. He ain't seen nothing yet. He just met me not long ago.
Okay.
A critical moment, and I found this article in the Wall Street Journal. In 2000, we began to kind of shift popular opinion toward opiates. The medical community, and I actually went back and read some of the Joint Commission, Rev's smiling again, and it began directing hospital and medical policy by calling pain a fifth vital sign. In other words, pain was not a symptom, it was a condition, and we had to treat. It was like reading your blood pressure, your heart rate, your temperature, your breathing. Pain became this essential fifth vital sign. And I read this in 1999. This was in the American Medical Association's journal. Excuses for inadequate pain control appear to have run their course and will no longer be accepted. Poor pain control is unethical, clinically unsound, and economically wasteful. So we had the backing of it, because if you always think about, here's what I found in government. When you drop a rock in the water, the ripples end up somewhere. And it was really driven by oncologists who wanted some sort of pain relief for people in terminal illness. We all understand that. Of course we do. And then it became profit motivated. I mean, it became, how many of these pills can we sell? How much money can we make? You had the backing of the medical profession, pharmaceutical companies, and next thing you know, you got a chronic condition, you got dental pain, somebody's prescribing you Percocet, Vicodin, OxyContin, and we have gone off the chains, as we like to say, in the number of prescriptions written. I live in a world where the majority of answers are somewhere balanced between the public sector and the private sector. You know, we have a debate here every day about what is the fundamental role of government. The private sector does this, the public sector does that. Bernie wants the public sector to do everything, we kind of want to find some semblance of balance in what the private and public sector. But I believe the only way to deal with darkness and brokenness and the stigma of addiction is what I call a sacred sector, the church. And I began reaching out and involving myself in the church at Sandhurst, asking if there would be an interest in allowing people to have a place to go, not to find a cure, not to get off opiates on the first day they show up, but to raise awareness and give some sense of encouragement. And Adam Richardson and Reeves Cannon have agreed to allow Sandhurst, and I'll talk to Jay here in just a second because he's got a family association that already does something like that. But Adam, from your perspective, is it an epidemic, and what is the church's responsibility?
Absolutely, Ken. And the church has got to step up and do something. I think people have traditionally seen the church as something that relates to God, the invisible, faith, and that's true. But when God made the world, he didn't make just souls. He made souls and bodies. And he said it was all very good. And so we have to care for people's souls and bodies. Traditionally, the church has been good at faith, or churches kind of fall into one or two hoppers. They're either good at faith or works. They're good at, heart and head, or they're good at hands and feet. And the model that we see in Scripture is that Christ was good at both. And we've got to be able to reach out to people and meet them not only at what they need ultimately with God, but with the struggles and issues that they see right in front of them, where they have broken relationships and addiction and so forth.
And Reeves, I'll let you jump in here as an associate pastor at Sandhurst and a counselor as well. I mean, you see up close and personal this struggle, and you too believe that the church has a responsibility. This is not just an issue that will be solved by the public and private sector.
No, it's certainly not, Ken. And as a licensed professional counselor, I've worked with lots of families over the years, and I've seen parents in my office who child has committed suicide as a result of this epidemic, other deaths that have happened, and it just devastates entire families. I've got personal family members who have struggled in various ways, and I think you said earlier that it really knows no socioeconomic bounds, and that is really true. In fact, I was listening to a podcast earlier this morning about this epidemic, and they talked about how it was the middle-class suburban mom who was the most likely to be addicted. And I have no idea if that's technically true, but it certainly gives credence to the fact that anyone is susceptible to this issue.
In 1991, doctors wrote about 75 million opioid prescriptions. Today, we're writing about 325 to 350 million prescriptions annually. I mean, just think of that. There's 330 million people in America. We're writing a prescription for opiates for every single American every single year. And I'm not here to blame anybody. I mean, I've got some real strong held opinions about where the blame lies and how we let it get to here. I'm not interested in really rehashing that. What I'm interested in is bringing people to a place where they don't have to live. And I'm being very personal here, with the shame, guilt, darkness, brokenness that my family had to deal with, because I believed my kid could stop taking this medicine. And I'll tell you, the toughest conversation I've ever had to have is with his sister. He's got a sister. We had a big surprise. I used to tell people when I ran for office, got 2 in college, 1 in the 2nd grade, all with the same woman. Because I had to clarify that, because as a Republican, they want to know about that second marriage if you indeed had one of those. But she had heard me tell him how sorry, no count, and good for nothing he was. And that brings a lot of just family animus. I mean, it gets real complicated and difficult. And to sit her down and say, look, your brother's not sorry, no count, good for nothing. He's sick. And we're trying to find him some safety. We're trying to find him some help to make him a better person. And I fundamentally believe that the recovery centers are the way to go to get yourself to a place of isolation. You can reset, you can recalibrate, I'll let Jesse kind of explain some of the processes he's gone through, but I want to go to my good friend Jay Jordan. And Jay and I have a lot of conversations about a lot of different things. The one luxury I have that Jay doesn't is I'm a former politician. There are no guardrails to what I can say or stand for or believe in, but I know Jay to be very caring, and I know Jay to be very sincere. And I know some family relationships that Jay has, and I know the appreciation he has for what we're trying to do here. And I want Jay, I guess what I'm asking you is, do you agree? And I didn't give you any fair warning. I texted you about 6:30 this morning. I think you would agree that the church has a responsibility in this unique endeavor. How can government help empower the church in allowing it to address some of these issues?
You know, I think it's in sitting around conversations like this. I think this is a big part of it in getting the word out sort of in a medium like this. But I'd say it's really two things that I see on a regular basis. Number one, and this goes back to that concept of getting the word out. A few years ago, I think 99% of people were in a situation that you described that affected your own life. We thought it was an issue that was unique to places like New York or Los Angeles and things like that. And we didn't realize that these issues were in our own backyard, so to speak, and affected families and lives all around us. So having opportunities like this becomes a function of how we not embrace the problem, but discover how deep the problem really goes. And then the second thing, and this applies directly to what we're talking about today, you know, we live in a culture and a world where as Christians, you know, we're told, put that in your closet, keep that in, you know, button up, so to speak. And we're never going to solve a problem like this by doing that. That's like tackling a problem with both arms tied behind your back. Government, and I get this, we live in South Carolina. We live in the buckle of the Bible Belt. So if there's going to be a place that's going to say, the path forward is one that involves God, this is going to be the place. And because of that, we have an opportunity. I was at church last night, heard a testimony from a young lady. You show me something that'll change someone's life any deeper, any quicker than a personal relationship with the person of Christ, and it just doesn't exist. There's nothing else that'll change it. So this concept that government doesn't have a role or responsibility in this is just wrong. You know, government has to come alongside and as best it can, not in interfering, but in helping groups like we're talking about today to help them fight this problem.
Because the word is brokenness. I mean, I've tried to search long and hard for the appropriate word, and actually, you know, I looked at dictionaries and synonyms of this word or that word because I wanted to be a little more, you know, a little brighter than I really am, or appear to be a little brighter. But I think brokenness is the one word because we've lived it. Adam said yesterday, this is not a rifle. I mean, this is a shotgun. It's not that just, and I'm using Jesse as a personal example, not that Jesse was struggling, the family, you know, the support team, the entire universe is affected by this person and their condition. Adam, I want to go back to you because, and I applaud you for this, and I applaud Reese for this. I grew up in the buckle of the Bible Belt. And if you weren't making true believers of Christ, you weren't doing the job of the church. And I can remember as somebody who's a bit of I don't easily conform, and I've got some scars on my back to kind of prove that. But I've just always felt, and I told you yesterday, I read a lot about the church's response to the HIV virus.
Yeah.
And you can honestly, if you're analytical enough and interested enough, you can travel the road of the church being very judgmental.
Right.
About, you know, responding to a family who had a child who was out of the mainstream. I'll just leave it there. And the way the church appeared to be so judgmental, and the opinion young people have of organized religion today. You're going to make sure that doesn't happen in any church you're associated or affiliated with. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I've gathered that from your actions and comments.
Jesus was known as a friend of sinners, and if we're not doing our job. I think a lot of people look at these big issues and think, you know, it's going to get us off mission. It's going to get us away from what we're supposed to be doing. People, this is the mission. Healing broken lives, as you said, Ken, is the mission. And part of that is physical, and it starts with God, but it also goes down to our relationships with others and our own bodies. And if we can't be addressing that, we really need to close the doors and do something else. A lot of churches don't do this because it gets messy and it's trouble, and Brian knows all about that. But if this is exactly the kind of thing that Jesus rolled up his sleeves and got himself involved in, and the church has to be able to recognize the whole person is involved in this.
Let's do this. If you guys can hang around another segment, I want to take a break. We got to pay bills. No matter how much we want the church to help in this problem, we still got a bottom line we got to be held accountable to. Cato, let's take a break. We'll be back. We'll continue this conversation on the other side.
We'll be right back with more of Wake Up Carolina.
Takes Mondays to make Fridays, 843-661-0937, a very different version of Wake Up Carolina, but something I just felt we had to do, something that, and it's not about me. I mean, please understand, this is not therapy for me. I'm probably better off not putting my business on the street and talking about things in the matter-of-fact way we have. It's probably better that and safer that we deal with our issues as most people deal with their issues. But I just felt I understood the dynamic we're dealing with and some of the opportunities to help. I want to go back to my son, Jesse. Jesse, if you don't mind, talk about how different you were when you were an addict to the way you were raised, because that puts a little, that makes your mom feel better about, what we're here talking about, and kind of where you are today. I mean, full story from being the little kid that was raised in church, like a lot of people in South Carolina are, to the next thing you know, paying somebody $20 to go to Columbia on a Sunday night at 11 o'clock because somebody may have 2 pills that you desperately needed. But I mean, it doesn't matter if you ramble. There's no exact answer to this, but kind of where you were transitioning into that lifestyle, and then hopefully, in the period of time you've been clean and transitioning out.
I mean, from when I knew that I was an addict, there wasn't much I wouldn't do to get high. If I had no money, I would figure something out. That's all you do every day. You wake up, you got to figure something out, how to get $35, because you're not getting it is not an option. If you got to sell something to a pawn shop or just do anything to get it.
You told me you sold clothes, you sold TVs, you sold computers.
Yeah, I sold pretty much everything I had or could afford to sell without y'all finding out, you and Mom. But it changes the way you think. You don't think like a person anymore. You're artificial. You're just, that's all you do. You wake up, you think about it. If you do get something that day, you take it, however you take it, and then, you're good for maybe an hour, and then you're back thinking about it. What can I do tomorrow?
You told me one time that even in the darkest days and the most desperate times, you prayed all the time. Explain that. In NA and AA, they call them foxhole prayers. You just make deals, or you try to bargain with God, I guess. Just help me out, and I'll never do it again. Just something like that. I mean, it's every day. It's a routine every night, and that's what you do. And then we hit rock bottom together. You go off to get help. Why do you believe that the recovery centers and the treatment centers that are somewhere other than where you live, why do you believe that's the best recipe for long-term sober living? For me, it definitely was, because I was 5.5, 6 hours from Florence. There's not much I could have done even if I wanted to, I can't walk from Dahlonega, Georgia to Florence, South Carolina. You just can't do it. It's got to disrupt your life. It's got to be significant and a big deal, because if it's not, you may have a good week or a good couple of months and not do anything, but you're going to relapse. It's got to interrupt your life somehow. It's got to be that big of a deal. And how much better is it now that hopefully this is permanently in the rearview mirror? It's night and day. They tell you not at rehab. They tell you not to be cocky with your addiction, because it can. I mean, this 200 some odd or 400 some odd days I have now can go to zero, like that, like in the blink of an eye. You can be confident, but you can't be cocky. It's night and day. I mean, while you're using, people who have kind of been in that situation will tell you that life is better sober, and then you don't believe it because you're feeling good, but it is. It's so much better. It's so much better sober. I'm not a prisoner anymore. And Reeves, I'll go to you, and then I'll go to Brian, because you guys deal in this world of counseling and trying to offer people therapy and help. Obviously, it's not a cookie cutter. There's not a one size fits all. I mean, recovery is different for different sorts of people. But what have you found? What have you found begins a successful recovery in dealing with, we can say, addiction, mental illness, depression, whatever ailment people are dealing with? And then I'll go to Brian and get a similar answer to that. But I mean, because I want to get Adam and Jay in here in a second, but I want Adam really to speak to, how we want to bring people out of the shadows and rid them of the embarrassment and the brokenness and darkness. But from a perspective of therapy, why is Jesse saying what he's saying about the recovery centers offering the best opportunities?
Well, Ken, I really think it's important that the individual who's struggling with the addiction they have to want the change. If they don't want to rid themselves of the struggle, then it's a tremendously uphill battle. It's already an uphill battle, but that makes it even more difficult. Also, having the family involved in the treatment is so crucial because of a support system. And obviously, from a biblical perspective, a faith perspective, I think a relationship with Christ is a part of the healing process, certainly. But as we were talking off air, this isn't just a faith issue. There is a physiological components to addiction as well that we have to address. And oftentimes these various sectors don't communicate well, and they kind of have an adversarial relationship. And I think it's important to try to bring the science as well as the faith into it to have a comprehensive treatment approach.
Brian?
Yeah, so in the middle of my addiction, my pastor David White at the time said, "Brian, you need to go as far away as possible for as long as possible." Now I thought he was trying to get rid of me, but it was great advice. I went to an addictions facility, Reformers Unanimous, in Rockford, Illinois, which was almost 1,000 miles away. And like Jessica was saying, you're 1,000 miles away. You can't just walk home. But it was as much for me as it was for my family. The dust has to settle. Addiction the addict affects everybody within arm's reach. So everybody's affected. So me getting away allowed me, one, to get away from the guilt and shame that Adam's going to talk about, of everything that I was doing to hurt my family. I had to be removed from that. My wife and my family had to be removed from my bad behavior. And then it took 30 days, at least 30 days, just for the dust to settle. We have these treatment programs that are 28 days. And man, 28 days, you're just starting to get your mind straight a little bit. So I think, going away to a treatment facility for at least 3 to 6 to 12 months allows you to the dust to settle, for healing to take place. You got these open wounds with family. Healing's got to take place, but you've got to address the addiction. But then you got to get people in a state where they feel better about themselves, where they can work and they start to physically feel better. And then spiritually, for me, the spiritual aspect of realizing that the depression and anger and frustration and loneliness and grief and all these things that we were dealing with medications for, and there is a role for that we can deal with those things spiritually too, is where I found my victory in Christ over my addiction.
Jay, I'm going to go to you, and then I'm going to conclude with Adam here. The government does some things fairly well. It does some things pretty lousy. The public sector, it's a hodgepodge of success and failures. Of the private sector, I've often said capitalism is perfect if you left capitalist out of the equation. You can't do that. Human nature is what human nature is. The human condition tends to interject itself in a good way and bad way in almost everything it's ever involved itself in. You're in government. I don't think that government deals with brokenness too effectively nor efficiently. There will be a lot of money in play. I hate to talk like this because we're talking about addiction, we're talking about therapy, we're talking about help and recovery. But in essence, the federal government and many states across the country have settled with Big Pharma. In essence, that's who we're talking about. And there will be somewhere between $65 and $100 billion available. I've done the math. That it would have a monumental effect or impact on how many young people, or adults for that matter, are allowed to go to world-class treatment centers to get their lives reestablished. I'm not asking you to go on the record and say, yes, of course I'll lobby on behalf of the church. But as we seek the proper people to allocate the funding toward, does the church deserve consideration? Does the church deserve representation when governments begin allocating resources? My problem, Jay, and I think you agree with me, a dollar spent in government's not as effectively spent as a dollar in the private sector. And I'm afraid if all of this, money ends up in the hands of government, we squander many opportunities. Does the church, does the sacred sector, as I like to refer to it, does it have the right to have a seat at the table when resources are allocated in response to the opioid epidemic?
Absolutely. This goes back to what I said a little while ago about if you try and tackle a problem like this without the church, without faith, you're going to be fighting a bear with two hands tied behind your back. you said, government does some things well. The reality is, and at least from where I sit, government probably does the things well that no one else can do. This is not one of those things. Government is great at sometimes at building roads and police force, and I see you snickering over there, Dave. But this is not one of those things. The path forward in this is where groups like this come together, and as a government leader, I'm not the right person to tell you where the funds go. And I think one of the things the president has said in this, you referred to the sacred sector. If you look at some of the things the Trump administration has done, it's been communicating well with groups, with faith-based groups, so it can get better direction on where this funding needs to go. I think about, you talk about government and how it functions. I think about Reagan a lot when he used to say, be very leery when someone from the government shows up and says, I'm here to help. That's a dangerous place to be. The path forward is one where government resources are brought to bear, but there's a partnership, a private faith-based partnership in many ways, so it can direct out where these funds can best be used for the benefit of the most number of people.
Can I jump into that
sure.
again? One thing
you just did.
I'm sorry. One thing with this funding is you have got to get collaboration. Some of the funding that we look to get with the House of Hope, you have to show a continuum of care. And I don't think that funding, I'll put the positive, physical, mental, spiritual. The funding needs to be a collaboration of MUSC, McLeod, House of Hope, Reformers Unanimous, I Hope Counseling. These groups get to the table, and together, collectively, they put in for funding, because without detox, you can't have recovery. Yeah. Without a place to go, for a long period of time, you can't have recovery. Without some aftercare, you can't have recovery. It needs to be that we don't fight for this money, that this money brings us together to work together, because that's the problem.
I think
we're not working together.
That's very well said. There's not a lot of collaborating, and never before. I mean, this is similar to the tobacco settlement. I think the tobacco settlement was $225 billion. This is going to be somewhere between $75 and $100 billion. I've done the math. I mean, if a 30-day recovery center is $25,000, and these things are incredibly expensive. I mean, I know in the first person, these are incredibly expensive, but you're talking about investment of a lifetime. I mean, you're talking about changing or saving someone's life forever. $1 billion is a lot of money. $100 billion is an enormous amount of money. And I don't want the government to do what the government historically has done, and that is to turn $100 billion into $10 billion of in-game results. No matter how much money we have, you stand steadfastly beside the perspective that the church has an enormous responsibility. You guys, and I'm pointing to reason, Adam, have put your money where your mouth is. You're allowing me to be on your campus. Tonight we begin. And Adam, you asked me, what is the end game? Reeves, I don't have any idea. I mean, I really don't. I don't know where we go from here. I just know that from Jesse, and our family's experience, the shame, guilt, brokenness, and darkness that are so burdensome in your life, you don't know where to go. You don't know what to do, or you're embarrassed, or you're willing to tell your best friend. Should you tell them, or could they help you? Could they not help you? And I just believe from my youth, the church was the place you went, knowing somebody there would love on you and care for you and try and help you get to a better place. And I'm so excited that the two of you have allowed the church at Sandhurst to take the first step in a journey that nobody knows where we end up.
Well, Ken, you got people listening right now, and they're thinking, that's all great. I would love to be free. I would love to have Jesse's story. I just don't believe it. I don't even know what to do. And could I just say to you, whoever you are, reach out to your church. Because a lot of people think they got to get cleaned up to go to church. That is the opposite. When people came to Jesus, they didn't find a wagging finger. They found open arms. We are here, and we are fellow strugglers with you. There are no perfect people in the church. We are right there in the same boat with you. And all of us need the grace of God every day. And so could I just put some words in your mouth? If you could just make a call, show up, whatever it takes, and say these words, we're struggling, we need help. And then whatever that person says, then you just start talking. And that is the first step towards getting out of the dark and into the light, because the problems will not be healed in the dark, in the shadows. Sanders is opening the doors tonight at 6:30. Ken will be there. A team will be there to listen and just start that process if that's where you need to start.
And we don't know where we end up, but we begin tonight at the Church of Sanders at 6:30. I know your father-in-law, Adam, gave a compliment yesterday. We Googled places to go and get help for opioid addiction. There was one church. There was one church in the entire area that had an asterisk beside its name, and I believe that every church should have an asterisk beside its name, and that's what we hope to accomplish here. And I just think that is the mission, the ultimate mission of the church. So thanks to all of you for being here. I love you, and you know I do. And
Love you too.
if you're out there struggling, and I know there are those that are, God loves you. There's hope. There's redemption. It's beautiful. It's hard. It's complicated. It's difficult. But it doesn't happen until you admit that there's a problem and you begin to confront and deal with the problem. Take a break. Back in a minute.
This is Wake Up Carolina with Ken Ard and Dave Baker.
Hey, a couple of statistics that I think you'll find interesting. The odds of you dying from an opioid overdose are now greater than dying in an automobile accident or death by homicide. I mean, this is the first year, 2019, about 57,000 people died as a result of opioid addictions. They're not even counting those that have died of fentanyl or heroin. These are just prescribed opiates. I mean, transitioning. Jesse and I have had a lot of conversations. When you can't get the 35, you end up trying to get 15, and you get some sort of syringe full of black tar heroin, and you share. I mean, you begin to share a half dose and a dose here. I mean, it's just a nasty, nasty existence. The number of pregnant women addicted to opioids has quadrupled from 2000 to today. 1.5 was the number in 2000, 6.5 women per 1,000. Why does that really, really matter? Who has babies in our society? Young women. Every 25 minutes, a baby is born suffering from opioid withdrawal. I mean, the numbers are staggering. 500,000 people have passed away since 2002 directly as a result of opioid addiction. 50% of all the foster care money the federal government spends is spent on kids who are taken away from their parents because of opioid addictions. Let me say that again. To me, that's the most staggering figure. That's the family unit. We're talking about church. To me, God's pride and joy is the family, the nuclear family. The family unit is being ravaged at an astronomical rate as a result of the opioid addiction, to the tune of 1/2 of every dollar the government spends in supplementing or subsidizing foster care is spent as a result of one or both parents being addicted to opioids. We can't turn a blind eye. I can't change the world. None of us in this room individually can change the world, but we can surely change our part of the world. And I told Adam, I've told Reeves, I've told everybody in this room, I'm normally the guy, when I get my ox out of the ditch, I get my car back in the road, I kind of move on. You come by and say, hey, can you contribute $100? Sure, I will. Absolutely. But I'm not getting my hands messy in that. I don't have any choice but to try and help lead the charge in this, because I have lived it. I understand the guilt. I understand the shame. I understand the darkness, the brokenness. And I just don't believe the public nor private sector have an answer for brokenness. I think that answer resides in the church, what I call the sacred sector. I didn't coin that phrase. I've read it and all this information I've tried to gather. But and that's why one of these guys in the room, because I know they share that sentiment. Rev, I apologize to you for having to put up with. I mean, Rev's with me every morning, and he knows when I'm having a good morning or a bad morning. And a lot of my bad mornings are predicated upon how Jesse was doing. I mean, I'm being very honest. And I can tell you that he is a completely different young man, and he has a very productive and beneficial life. But somebody's going to end up dead under a bridge. Somebody else is going to end up dead under a bridge as a result of an opioid addiction and an overdose or black heroin, and that's just nasty. And we are commanded to try and engage, and we must. Back in a minute.